Welcome to Myth Madness, and my season on Persian mythology. In the last two episodes, I covered what the Persian epic poem the Garshaspnama says about the hero Garshasp's ancestry, and how he was descended from Jamshid, a legendary king of the world. I told how Garshasp met the new king of the world, Zahak, and was tasked with killing a dragon to clear the way to India. To add to the dragon talk, I shared what the older Zoroastrian religious texts, such as the Avesta, say about Garshasp, his role as a slayer of dragons, and also his prophesied resurrection at the end of the world, so he could protect humans from an empowered Ahriman, Zoroastrianism's paramount evil spirit. This episode will continue with the next part of the Garshaspnama. With the dragon slain and the path to India clear, it is only natural that Garshasp's next adventures will be in India. But first, why India? In myths and legends around the world, many heroes go on quests, but it is not always clear exactly where they are when they do them. But in the Garshaspnama, it is very clear. What's more is that Garshasp is not the only hero in Persian mythology who performs quests in India. There are several others, and I will cover them in future episodes. But the question is, why? What was the fascination the Persians had with India? There are in fact a couple reasons. The first is historical and fairly straightforward. Many Persian kings and warlords through history led military campaigns into areas of modern-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. The poets who wrote some of the Persian epic poems likely played up stories of heroes going into India to pay homage to the royal patrons who were doing the same thing. The second reason, though, is more mythological. Persian poets did not call the land we know today as India, India. They used the term Hindustan, and in their poems they often rhymed Hindustan with the Persian word Jadustan, which means land of magic. The place was considered a fantastic land full of strange people, unfamiliar landscapes, and animals. In real life, there was some familiarity with India already, due to trade and conquest. The people there spoke languages very different from Persian. They practiced religious faiths, very different from Islam and Zoroastrianism. And all of this combined to give India a very exotic feel. But it was still a place that lied tantalizingly just beyond the horizon. It was the perfect place for a hero to embark on strange adventures in epic poems. Okay, so let's move on with the next segment of the Garshaspnama. While Garshasp was slaying a dragon after accepting Zahak's challenge, something of great significance was happening far to the east. In India, there was a great king named Mirag, and he ruled from his capital city, Kanauj. His name is very likely derived from the word Maharaja, which is Sanskrit for great king. Kanauj is also an important historical city in India. The ancient Greeks likely knew of it, as there is a closely named city referenced in the works of Ptolemy. Its rulers controlled large swaths of northern India during the 600s AD. In the centuries afterwards, it was the center of a conflict between three competing kingdoms and was the wealthiest city in medieval India. So it makes sense that the Garshaspnama names it as the capital of the fictional Mirag's Indian Empire. One of Mirag's family relatives was a man named Bahau. He ruled over Serendib, what is now known as Sri Lanka. Bahau served under Mirag, and Mirag, in turn, reported to the king of the world, Zahak. But Bahau questioned why Mirag was loyal to Zahak. The king of kings was a monster. He lived far away in Jerusalem, and surely Mirag could rule India independently. This led to a resentful dispute between the two men. Eventually, Bahau gained support of half the Indian army and rebelled against Mirag. Mirag's forces were defeated a handful of times. Eventually, Zahak learned what was happening to his vassal, but he was far away in Jerusalem. Fortunately, another of Zahak's vassals, Athrat, lived in Zabul, which is much closer to India and located near the border of modern-day Iran and Afghanistan. Zahak wrote a letter to Athrat, king of Zabul. The letter praised Athrat, saying good fortune had given Zahak a loyal subject like the king of Zabul. It informed him of the troubles brewing in India. Zahak wanted Athrat to send his son Garshasp without delay, and he promised to supply the young man with an army, equipment, reinforcements, and all the treasure he would need. After Athrat read the letter, he sat quietly, thinking for a long time, and then called Garshasp to him. He asked Garshasp if he would take charge of the war. Athrat told his son that he feared fortune would abandon Garshasp somewhere, and he would be killed. But Garshasp replied he was created for battle, and if war was going to break out, then why delay? He also said something else, which I think is important to point out. Garshasp said, "If I saw anyone worthy of royalty, I would take the life of that snake-shouldered man Zahak. But as there is no one at hand, I fear we could have worse than what exists. The world is in order when it has a sovereign, even if he is wicked. There is no shame in obeying the king's command." This line is interesting, as it highlights a key difference between the Garshaspnama and the more well-known Shahnameh. In the Shahnameh, Zahak is unequivocally evil, and his reign is characterized as a 1,000-year dark age. But in the Garshaspnama, this is not highlighted. We get some short, almost throwaway references to his snake-like features, and there's an overall impression that he's not a particularly good king. But we don't get specific examples of his wickedness and his cruelty. His vassals still support him, and behave as they likely would under any king in any epic poem. However, Garshasp's speech here seems to explain more. He says he would fight Zahak if he could, but who would then take his place? No one, yet, has arrived on the scene, and even if Zahak is a bad king, he is still king, and so Garshasp should work for the benefit of the realm by working for his king. That seems to be the strategy all the nobles are following during the reign of Zahak. And in fact, afterwards, Athrat gives Garshasp numerous pieces of advice on how to deal with the King of Kings. Things like never speak to him as an equal, don't show up when he is angry, and when he is angry at you, quickly apologize. Do not be mad if you ask him for something and don't get it, and always remember your rank comes from the king, and not from yourself. It's certainly advice people have used throughout history when dealing with fickle leaders. Garshasp accepted his father's advice and prepared for the journey to India. He chose 1,000 warriors from Zabul, each one worth 1,000 warriors in battle. Then he first marched his army not to India, but west to Syria to meet Zahak. When Garshasp arrived at Zahak's palace, the King of Kings welcomed him and placed a seat for Garshasp next to the throne. For a full week they talked of music and wine. He gave Garshasp many treasures, and when the week was up, told him to go quickly to India, aid Mirag, and bring vengeance to Bahau. Zahak told Garshasp he was to chain the rebellious Bahau and hang him until dead, and if the Chinese came to Bahau's aid, Garshasp was to fight a war against them as well. Zahak also told Garshasp that he had assembled an army of 300,000 soldiers for the hero to lead. Garshasp told the king he did not need the soldiers, as the men he brought from Zabulistan would be enough. But the king replied that Bahau also had an army of heroes, and what use was a general who did not have any troops? So Garshasp relented, counted out 12,000 men, and organized them into groups of 100 horsemen. He loaded 6,000 camels with weapons of war, and the combined army departed to the sound of crashing drums. Garshasp's army departed by ship from a place called Yeli. In 6 months they covered what should have been a year's journey, and arrived at Mirag's capital city. Once again, Garshasp was welcomed with a feast. Wine was poured, music was played, and gold, coins, pearls, and jewels were piled in great heaps and gifted to Garshasp and the Iranians. This continued every day for a full week. But when Mirag told Garshasp his enemy's army was only a week's march away, Garshasp jumped to his feet. "I came here to fight, not to play and enjoy banquets." So Garshasp and Mirag combined their forces and marched out of the city. They came to a mountain surrounded by a dense forest. Mirag warned Garshasp not to go further into the forest, as it was the home of a fierce tiger that could kill an elephant with a single swipe of its claw. Garshasp told the king he always wanted to fight a tiger, and went into the forest with his club and bow to find it. By nightfall, he hadn't found it, and returned to his tent disappointed. But the following morning, scouts reported that they had seen not one, but 4 tigers further down the road. Garshasp went forward alone on his horse to fight the tigers. The poem describes them as formidable beasts, with sharp claws and even having fire burst from their mouths. Garshasp smashed 2 with his club and then pulled out the tongue of a 3rd tiger and crushed its head with his legs. The 4th tiger tried to escape by running into the forest, but Garshasp threw his club at the tiger and killed it before it disappeared. Garshasp went into the woods and looked for more tigers to hunt, but didn't find any. With that sideshow out of the way, the army resumed marching, and soon found itself relatively close to where Bahau's forces were camped. Garshasp had his men pitch their tents and post guards around the area. He then ordered his secretary to write a letter to Bahau. The letter was full of insults. In it, Garshasp told Bahau that he had the face of a crow, was wicked and weak. It said Bahau owed his throne to Mirag, and that he had betrayed his master. The hero offered Bahau a chance to throw down his weapons and bow to Mirag. And if not, then he should prepare to fight, lose, and face the gallows. Garshasp sent the letter and an interpreter. When Bahau read it, he became very angry. He had the interpreter's head cut off, and he ordered Garshasp's messenger to go back and tell Mirag that Bahau would gain the throne of India by blood. After the exchange of letters, the 2 opposing generals got their armies into position. Garshasp told Mirag to keep a lookout from the nearby mountaintop. Garshasp placed 10 great champions, who I won't list, throughout his army. Bahau did the same with 4 of his own generals. They were named Ajira, Mabtar, Tupal, and Tiv. The armies came together. Garshasp and Bahau's generals fought duels with each other. The brown earth was covered with discarded helmets and scimitars and turned purple from all the spilled blood. Garshasp grabbed the bow he had previously used to kill the dragon. He went into the fray and shot 10 arrows at once, each killing an enemy elephant. He rode through the enemy ranks on his horse, cutting heads from shoulders with each swing of his saber. He swung his club and threw his javelin. Every throw from his javelin took out 40 tents. Word reached Bahau that Garshasp was single-handedly turning his army upside down. Bahau was amazed that someone so young could wreak such destruction. He pointed out that Garshasp was not even old enough to grow a full beard, and his cheeks were still rosy. When the moon rose and night fell, the 2 armies stopped fighting and returned to their camps. Mirag prepared a feast to honor Garshasp's efforts, and they drank a cup of wine for each of the charges Garshasp led in the day's battle. Mirag gave numerous treasures to Garshasp and the Iranians, in recognition of the bravery they showed that day. Later that night, reinforcements arrived. Garshasp asked Mirag where they had come from, and the Indian king replied that they were his men, and he could have millions of brave warriors summoned for the war if needed. But Garshasp warned against this, saying the call for such a force would leave the king with no treasure, no food, and eventually no territory. Garshasp told Mirag that he and the Iranians could handle Bahau, and did not need more help. So Mirag selected a portion of the force and dismissed the rest of the other army. Meanwhile, Bahau sent his brother and son to Serendib to prepare everything for war. That way, if Bahau lost the coming battle, he could retreat to the safe fortifications of Serendib. The following morning brought the second battle. Bahau entrusted troops to his generals Tiv and Tupal, and they began to march. The cries of their warriors and the call of their trumpets reached the Iranian camp. Garshasp divided his army between his generals, and had some men prepare an ambush. Once again, the main armies rushed into battle. The Iranians struggled painfully before Garshasp came to their aid. Bahau's general Tupal saw his chance and threw a javelin at Garshasp's chest, but its tip did not pierce the hero's armor, and the javelin shattered into fragments. Garshasp swung his saber and hit Tupal's head with such force both the man and his horse were split in 2. Garshasp then put the rest of the enemy army to the sword. getting men on both sides of the conflict wet with blood. The Indian general Teeve watched this from a distance and asked his men if they were ashamed to flee from a single man. Ajira, another Indian hero, boastfully declared he would fight the Iranian general. He rode away on his horse until he came to a group of Iranians and yelled that he wanted to fight Garshasp. Hearing these words, Garshasp rode up on his black horse. Ajira was no match for him, and the impulsive Indian's severed head was soon rolling on the ground. After this, all the Indians felt heartbroken, their souls consumed by fear. Teeve ordered another soldier, named Bekawi, to fight Garshasp, but Bekawi declined. "If I killed the enemy, I will have satisfied my desire and acquired fame, but if I foolishly abandon my head, what satisfaction will I have then?" Hearing this, Teeve grew angry and asked what a spear was even doing in this coward's hand. Teeve then saddled his own horse and galloped out onto the battlefield, and waving his steel club. Garshasp simply threw a long javelin at him and skewered Teeve before riding around waving the long javelin like a flag. Garshasp then threw the javelin at 2 more Indians, and so killed 3 men with the same weapon. The fighting continued, and Garshasp pulled a man by his belt from his saddle, threw him in the air, and then cut him in 2 on the way down. At nightfall, Mirag descended from the mountain and told Garshasp that enough fighting had been done that day. Meanwhile, at the enemy camp, Bahau was troubled. He bit his fingers and lips and worried that he would have to surrender his land, throne, and treasure to the enemy. He decided to send treasure and his daughter to Garshasp, and hoped that in this way he could get out of the hero's clutches and trick him into Bahau's own. So, when Garshasp was getting ready for bed, an attendant brought him a messenger from Bahau. The messenger said Bahau sent his compliments to Garshasp, and claimed he had never done anything to insult Garshasp or Zahak. Bahau promised to pay tribute, shower Garshasp with treasures, and give him his daughter to marry. But Bahau's message went even further. He said, with Garshasp as his ally, he could not only defeat Mirag, but also lead an army into Iran, pull Zahak from the throne, and conquer the world. The messenger ended up giving Garshasp a document outlining this offer of alliance. The message only served to make Garshasp angry. He told the messenger to tell Bahau that having become afraid of Garshasp's club, he was trying to take the path of deceit. Garshasp would not give Bahau drops of water to wet his lips, much less the alliance he was asking for. He sent the messenger away, and then went to Mirag and told him everything Bahau had offered, assuring Mirag he would not fall for Bahau's tricks. Meanwhile, back at the Indian camp, Bahau raged about the dangers of Garshasp's army and the Iranian hero's decline of his offer. His captain Mibtar came forward and promised he would kill Garshasp in the coming battle. The following morning, Mibtar assembled the warriors and elephants who would fight under him. His war horns blew, and even the moon was said to retreat from the sight of his terrible army. When the third battle began, a young Iranian named Zardadi, who was Garshasp's nephew, rushed forward to attack Mibtar, in hopes of finding an opponent equal to himself. A different enemy warrior charged up, and Zardadi drew his sword, which was poisoned, and killed the man. Garshasp's nephew killed multiple enemies, but eventually Mibtar's own son threw a spear at him, and Zardadi was killed. Garshasp was devastated by the death of his nephew, and swore vengeance. He hopped on his horse, and in his rage pulled Mibtar's son from his saddle, and dragged him around the battlefield until the man was dead. With the death of his son, it was now Mibtar's turn for grief and revenge. With his eyes full of tears, he came at Garshasp like lightning, but was no match for the hero. Garshasp's blade cut him across the belt, half of him stayed in the saddle, and the other half fell to the ground. With the death of Mibtar, the Indians began to retreat, and the Iranians cut them down as they fled. Behind them, the wounded lay on the ground, begging for mercy. Dead elephants looked like hedgehogs, with all the arrows that stuck up in their flesh. At the Indian camp, Bahau was not happy. He berated his men, saying they rush forward like lions, but when battle comes, they run away like gazelles. He told his men that tomorrow they would have a hard fight. The time for skirmishes was over. Tomorrow his captains must lead the entire army into battle. The following day, as the sun rose into the heavens, the roar of drums covered the land. Thousands upon thousands of warriors were mounted. Elephants were covered with armor. Platforms on their backs were manned with archers and fire throwers. In the center of the Indian army, one elephant was saddled with a throne made of crystal. Bahau sat on the throne. On his head was a crown, and in his hand a club. Above him rose a standard, its silk decorated with golden lions. A canopy of peacock feathers shaded Bahau from the sun. At the same time, on the other side of the battlefield, high up on the mountain ridge, watched Mirag. He sat on a throne made of ruby, and above him flew a standard decorated with an elephant. And so these two enemy kings watched from opposite sides. Between them, in the valley, was Garshasp. He ordered his men forward toward Bahau's. The air became full of bees, with arrow-fast bodies and iron spines. The steppe became like a garden, sprouted with lances instead of flowers. Its crop were the Indians, who had been miserably killed. At every step, one came across the cape of a man wearing a helmet, but without a body. Men fled every which way to avoid the ferocious Garshasp. One moment he had a lance, the next a short sword. He did not stop fighting, and he didn't tire of war. Bahau kept his men fighting, and this battle was bloodier than those of the previous days. Once again, night came, and the fighting stopped. By this time, Bahau worried his army was doomed to defeat, and it was too late to escape. It was time for another strategy. One of Bahau's loyal supporters was an Ethiopian. This man fought like a demon. He could run faster than the best heroes and track a gazelle better than any hunting dog. He told Bahau that he knew a way out for the king. The Ethiopian told him to write a letter to Garshasp, begging for safety and the hero's protection. The Ethiopian promised to take the letter to Garshasp, along with a poison-soaked dagger hidden in his robes. I will open Garshasp's ears with sweet words, and then plunge my dagger into his chest. Bahau was overjoyed to hear his minion's plan. He told the Ethiopian if he did this and survived, Bahau would make him king of Ceylon, modern-day Sri Lanka, which is interesting, as we've already been told that Sri Lanka in the form of Serendib is Bahau's center of power. The Ethiopian took Bahau's letter to Garshasp and was brought before the Iranian general. He bowed low and kissed the ground. Garshasp pointed him to an empty seat next to him. As Garshasp read the letter, he saw the Ethiopian's dagger. He jumped with a snort, used his own hand to block the weapon, and then punched the Ethiopian right in the face. The man lost consciousness. When he woke up, he sat with blood on his face and begged Garshasp for mercy. Fortunately for him, Garshasp was feeling magnanimous. He told the Ethiopian that if he showed the way to Bahau's tent, Garshasp would not cut off his head. So the Ethiopian quickly led the way. He was so quick, in fact, Garshasp had to tell him to slow down. Soon they came to the tent where Bahau kept his harem of women. They snuck inside and found Bahau asleep in a chair. The women were absent, and there were no guards to be seen. Garshasp jumped forwards and grabbed Bahau by the throat and held him down. Using torn-off pieces from the rebel king's own cloak, he bound Bahau's hands and gagged his mouth. The Ethiopian put the king on his back and followed Garshasp out of the camp. Back among the Iranians and their Indian allies, Garshasp had the Ethiopian drag a miserable Bahau before Mirag. Mirag was overjoyed, and a great shout went up as the men cheered for Garshasp. "Your name shall be remembered forever," Mirag told Garshasp. "May the heart of Zahak, the king of the world, be glad for you." Mirag then turned to the captured Bahau and let loose a torrent of insults. He whipped him with a knotted rope. "All people in India know that you are a bastard who came from nothing. I gave you a kingdom, a crown, and a throne, and this is how you repaid my good deeds, that you should try and take my place?" Bahau answered Mirag with a long monologue, basically burning down to, "When an enemy is bound, talking is easy. Because of your bad character, no one wanted you. I wasn't a gem, but I was still very capable. Alas, I had efficiency, but not good fortune. You are victorious only because this man from Persia came. If Garshasp had not answered your cry for help, your power now would be very small." This only made Mirag angry. But by this time, Garshasp had also lost his patience. He had ropes put around Bahau's hands and neck and ordered his mouth be filled with dirt. Afterwards, for his part in capturing Bahau, Garshasp rewarded the Ethiopian with a luxurious robe, a horse, and a seat among his Iranian generals. The following morning, with Bahau missing, his army began to break up and flee. The valley became empty, a world of empty tents and piles of discarded armor and weapons. Garshasp roamed through the refuse. He chose the best for himself and gave other things to his Iranian followers. Even though Bahau was captive and his army disbanded, Garshasp's job was not complete. Bahau's personal kingdom of Serendib was now ruled by Bahau's son, and he might continue the war against Mirag. In fact, when Bahau's son received news about Bahau's capture, he sat for a week feeling grief for his father. And then he assembled an army, distributed payment, and prepared his navy of 120 warships. By then, Mirag had built his own fleet of ships. He found Garshasp relaxing on an island. The hero had been keeping busy by hunting beasts covered in red and green hair and with faces on both sides of their head. Mirag told Garshasp about the dangers of Bahau's son and gave the Iranians 60 of his ships. Together, they set sail for Serendib. When the two opposing fleets finally came together, the battle was fierce. So many arrows flew that fish swimming by became riddled with them. The sails of the ships became drenched with blood. Waves threw bodies as high as the moon. Garshasp tossed his dead opponents into the sea. Every hour, he fed the fish a month's worth of food. 40 Serendib ships were sunk, and the Iranians captured 30 more. The rest turned and fled back to Serendib. The defeat of the navy made Bahau's son very unpopular in Serendib. In every hut, there were cries of mourning. Bahau's son's position became untenable, and he fled to Ethiopia to seek protection. When Mirag and Garshasp arrived in Serendib, the people lined up to apologize to Mirag. They told him they only followed Bahau for the sake of their own lives, and did not follow him because they thought he should be king. Mirag asked Garshasp what he thought, if the people should be pardoned or executed. Garshasp chose to forgive them. He led the army into the city, and for the next month Garshasp and Mirag celebrated their good fortunes, playing polo, dispensing treasures, and drinking the finest wines. And that's all for today. In this episode, Garshasp answered a call for help from an Indian king facing an uprising from a rebellious vassal. Garshasp went to India and waged a successful military campaign against the rebels. The Garshaspnama covered a series of battles between the two sides, but this won't be the end of Garshasp's adventures in India. So stay tuned and thank you for listening.